Hey everybody, Riot Mort here with Riot Kent, and it is time for the patch 11.17 patch rundown. This is the usual 2-week patch. Got some balance changes coming in for you. Ready to change a few things, fix a few things, but otherwise we're generally in a good state. So now is where you can expect a lot of nudges. There you go. Take a drink every time we say the word nudge. But otherwise, Kent, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Ready to talk about the new patch, just tuning things, nudging things around. It'll be good.
Take a drink. All right, let's dive right into it. First thing is on the system sides, we decided to make a change to where spatulas can now never count as one of your item components from your item drop. So basically, you couldn't see it behind the scenes, but there was gold item orbs and gold bonus orbs. Gold item orbs were always spatulas, but they would count as one of your 12 components, your 12 component minimum. So basically, TLDR here is spatulas should always feel like a bonus now. Should never feel like you're punished and being forced into getting a spatula as part of one of your 12.
Yeah, this is one of the ones where we talked to challenger players, got some feedback, and then it spawned like a larger conversation that me and Mort had, and then we just talked about how should this experience be, and then eventually it resulted in this change, which should feel a lot better when you get a spatula, whether or not like you're excited to play with the spatula or not. Either way, it'll be like a better feeling as a bonus because it'll only be bonuses.
Yep. Cool. All right. On the trait change, you want to explain Sentinel?
Yeah. So with Sentinel, when we first launched, players figured out that there's like a mathematically correct version to play Sentinel, where you don't upgrade some of your units so that your carry always starts with a buff. And playing it this way was always stronger than playing it the standard way. And it was especially true at like Sentinel 9, where like if you played Sentinel 9 and you played it mathematically correctly, where it always started on your Akshan 2 or Lucian 2, your comp was like super strong, as one of the best traits in the game. And if you played it the other way, and then sometimes the buff doesn't land on your carry ever in that fight, or until like really late, it's like an okay trait. And so like the gap between the best and the worst was too large, and also had like weird gameplay implications where like you purposely are skipping units and saving gold that helps you level up. So we decided to make the change so that to incentivize the buff to start on your carry almost always, and then balance around that. So what we changed was we shifted Sentinel to start, instead of on the unit with the most HP, it'll be the unit with the most items. And then in the case of a tie, where if like you have 3 items on your Lucian, 3 items on your Galio, it'll pick the one with the highest attack speed. So it still incentivizes the buff, the shield, to start on your carry, and the attack speed buff to start on your carry. And so then to compensate for that, we balanced around like your carry having the buff to start out. So we reduced the attack speed at 6 and 9, and the shield at 3 and 6. And the reduction of the shield at 3 is mostly to hit the Sentinel Skirmisher opener. But the one at Sentinel 6 is to also like maintain balance as we make this shift.
Nice. Yeah, not a lot to add there, other than hopefully this makes Lucian a little bit stronger of an end game carry because he'll get that guaranteed start of 90% attack speed, and then Akshan especially, and we'll talk about some adjustments from that. Skirmisher, basically 6 and 9 get a bit of a buff. 6 continues to be a really tricky one to balance because you can get to it so early at level 6, and it is very powerful at level 6, but it does fall off a bit. So I don't think this is going to make 6 skirmisher end games necessarily playable, but it is going to make skirmishers last a little bit longer before you probably have to rotate out of them.
Yeah, and on paper, this looks like, first glance, it looks like a really big buff from 6 to 8, but we're also kind of tuning down some of the 3-cost skirmishers that you'll see later. And so, like, this is intended to be like an overall buff, but it's not going to be the same magnitude. It's like, oh my God, it's going from 6 to 8. But it should help the trait a lot. If you hit it early, it'll be really strong, and it'll fall off a little bit more slowly.
Yep. And then Spellweaver. Spellweaver is an interesting one because when we started this rework, Spellweaver was in a pretty rough place. No one was really playing it. No one had figured out a comp to play. But then all of a sudden, people figured it out. There were some Korea players, especially, that really figured out how to make Spellweaver work, especially if you could get Spellweaver Fiddlestick. So it wasn't as necessary. That being said, we did want to make the spatula and the fantasy of the trait a little more fun. So what did we do, Kent?
Yeah, so we cut down the base AP, and we removed the stack cap. So now you can basically go infinite into as much AP as you want in that combat phase. So hopefully this incentivizes you to like think about, do I want to create like a battery somehow to like fuel my AP on my Vel'Koz, maybe a blue buff brand, something like that, and maintain that into the late game so that your carry can stack up forever. Or maybe you want to build like a Spellweaver tanky comp like Gwen or something, and just have your Spellweaver Gwen, stack up to a lot because she can just like sustain back up with a Gunblade or something.
Yep. And the thing to remember is Spellweaver stacks off anyone casting a spell, not just the Spellweavers. So the later the game goes, the more procs of this you get, and it stacks really fast, which basically means you can get like, 2 Spellweaver can be worth as much as 80 AP. 4 Spellweaver, I think we've seen as much as 200 AP. So it allows for some really cool itemization tricks and should make Spellweaver be an even more fun and exciting trait to play. Cool. All right, champion changes large 3 costs. This is a lot of 3 costs and a lot of red, but basically the idea here is that some of the 3 costs that you would get out of a box early would be a little too dominating. And then in addition, some of the 3-star 3 costs were just overperforming compared to 4 costs 2 stars or even 5 costs 2 stars. So a lot of nerfs across the board here. I'm gonna go through them real quick, and then Kent, you can dive into any you wanna highlight.
Sounds good.
But basically, Lee Sin minus some HP and minus some spell damage at 1 star and 3 star. Nidalee, a little less dodge chance, a little less attack speed at 1 star, and a little less at 3 star. Rakan really only needed a hit at 3 star. That 70% healing, or excuse me, 80% healing was a little nutty. That goes down to 70, as well as a little bit less spell damage. Riven was probably the most egregious. Riven on live is just good at every phase of the game. So lost a little HP, a little AD, and then at 3 star loses some bonus AD, and then as well as some spell damage. And the spell damage was one that I think a lot of people didn't even necessarily appreciate, but we've seen some Assassin 3 Riven's spell crit for like 1200 damage. It can get pretty nutty, so taking that down. And then finally Yasuo, some attack speed down, and 3-star damage down. So,
yeah, the main one I think I want to add on is Lee Sin. So like we might get some, you might look at this and be like, well, Lee Sin's attack speed slow is so strong. Why don't you nerf that? And it's like, well, the reason we went with like hitting Lee Sin's damage is that Nightbringer in 5.5 has a lot of ways of dealing damage already and doesn't really have as much frontline. Also, skirmishers don't really have as much utility as they used to, and so like Lee Sin's kind of provides the frontline for Nightbringers and the utility for skirmishers. So we don't want to take away that from his identity. He needs to be that like frontliner utility unit. So like, but he was still dealing a lot of damage. So like at 1 star out of a box in the early stages, he would cast twice and it would hit really hard. And so we're tuning that down. But we'll keep an eye on like the attack speed slow. We really would prefer not to hit it, but we think this will be enough to bring him on par with the other 3 cost box drops that you get in the early game.
Yep. Nice. All right. 4 costs. This is one that'll be interesting and debatable, but basically, Draven is underperforming where we want Draven to be. Draven is a kind of hard comp to run and should be one of the premier front-to-back damage carries in the game. So we're giving him a little attack speed to make him even more of a big threat.
Yeah, and why this isn't a large change is because we think this will actually push him more into the meta. He's kind of struggling right now. We think he's like really close though, and he looks, there are times when he can succeed. It's just tougher to make him work. So this little nudge should push him into like a playable carry in the meta.
Yep. On the 5 cost side, whew. Okay, so there's some big ones here. Let's start with Gwen, and I will say after playing this on PvE, I think this is probably the biggest change, but Gwen hasn't really been a great carry when you itemize her. She's been okay in some circumstances, but just a little too slow. So we're buffing up her spell damage, and I will say after playing it, the 2-star Gwen spell damage buff here is massive. So do not sleep on Gwen as a carry. I think she's going to have a lot of potential this patch.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty scary, but it'll be nice to see like some Gwen comps maybe pop up, maybe Spellweaver. And so with this new base spell damage that's so high, so it'll be fun.
Heimerdinger continues to be a very strong carry. He should be. He's a 5 cost. We just want to make it a little harder for him to cast his spell. So he gets a little less attack speed, which means it's a little harder to optimize with Shojin. And then takes a little bit longer to cast that spell at 160. Now I know what you're thinking. 160, does that just make him better with Archangels? And it's definitely not as clear of a nerf as it is with other champions, but this is still a nerf. It's still going to delay the spell, especially at 1 star, giving you time to possibly kill him before he comes down. That being said, if anything changes before the patch, we also could see his turret being nerfed some additional amount here. But those are the things to kind of look out for Heimerdinger. He'll still be very strong, though.
Yeah, similar to I think Riven's like 3-star spell damage. Like Heimerdinger's turret AD is like hit turret DPS is kind of like underappreciated, where it does deal like a significant chunk of damage. But like we wanted to nerf Heimer in a way that still maintains his identity of like when he casts, it's going to be a scary big cast, especially at 2-star.
Yep. All right, Kale, the return of Kale. Kale is just starting to creep back up, but she has a pretty big problem in that she's very, very squishy, especially at 1 star. So we're giving her a lot of HP back. This is a big buff, but let's be real. Kale, unless you have a perfect comp in items, hasn't really felt like a 5 cost. That's about to change. Kale got a lot of HP, got some more attack speed. Do not sleep on this champion. This champion is going to be good next patch. Put a Deathblade on this, put a Ginsu's, put some other stuff, grab 2 Legionnaire. This champ is going to melt things. And remember, a lot of her damage is true damage. So Kale's going to be scary.
Yeah, I'm a little bit afraid of this change, but it's like I know that Kale needs this. Like I've played a decent amount of Kale on live, and then I also saw some like other players play Kale, and it's like it's pretty easy to like kill her, but when she pops off,
Yeah.
and it's like she deals a lot of damage. So finally, she'll be like a 5 cost that you see in your shop, and you're like, should I play Kale? Can I move my items to Kale and
Yep.
like play something around her? So it would be good.
Yep. All right, and then Viego, you want to explain your Viego change?
Yeah. So Viego, everyone's favorite champion. He jumps in at 1 star with no Forgotten, no Assassin, nothing. Jumps in, steals your CC's your carry for like 5 seconds, and then steals them, one-shotting them basically with one ult, and that felt wrong. It's like you at least need to give him Assassin, give him Forgotten, maybe give him like an Ionic Spark or some damage items, not just like a Frozen Heart, no trades active and dealing like 100% of a unit's health. So changing that by heavily decreasing his damage, he will, like, if you do that, he'll still go in and CC unit for 5 seconds, which is still valuable if you can land it on the right unit. But you will need to actually invest in him for him to actually one-shot things. At 2-star and, with stuff like itemized, he'll still be able to do that. He should, like, 2-star Viego should still pay off. But in like compensation for this like loss of power and damage, when you actually pull off the steal, the stolen units will decay much more slowly. So like if you steal a good unit, that unit will be helping you out for a lot longer.
Yep. Yeah, so hopefully this alleviates some of the Viego 1 frustration, but again, we don't want to ruin that Viego is scary, and as much as he can be frustrating, that's what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to steal stuff, so he'll still be around. All right. On the item side, Giant Slayer. First off, have to apologize. Don't know how it happened, but there was a patch where Giant Slayer was supposed to get adjusted, and then somehow it got reverted. So on live, the values went back to what it was at the start of the set. Apologies for that. That being said, we are fixing it now and buffing it even more. So now the health threshold goes down quite a bit. The max damage goes down a little bit to compensate, but when it misses, it's going up a lot, going from 10 to 20%. This item is now not that bad when it's not proccing, especially when, because again, this is percent damage increase. This can be multiplicative on the right characters. So this should make Giant Slayer a little bit more desirable.
Yeah, kind of making it more of like a generic item that like you don't have to always play in only specific situations. Obviously, like it'll be super good in specific situations, but like when even when it doesn't, it'll still be a decent item, which should hopefully make it more playable overall.
Yep. All right, on the small side, A-Bomb 3, still a little tankier than we'd like. So A-Bomb 3 is losing 10 armor and MR. A-Bomb 4, same thing, but this is like microscopic. It's losing 5 armor and MR. And then A-Bomb 5, payoff not really worth it, so it's gaining some more AD, so at least A-Bomb 5 can hit a little hard. Redeemed 9 is a little overperforming, so we're just nudging that down a tiny bit. And then Legionnaire 4 and 6, we're really happy with how the Legionnaire change played out, but you're still not really seeing a ton of Legionnaire 4 and 6. So 4 and 6 are getting a bit of a buff to really try to tempt you into considering that, or if you get a Legionnaire spat, it should be a bit more worth. And so you can even see the jump from 2 to 4 Legionnaire is quite a bit of power.
Yep, yeah, you play 2 Legionnaire for the Omnivamp, and then you go to 4. Your main payoff is the attack speed. So we want to make sure that like attack speed is worth it when you choose to put in those units.
Cool. Vayne. Vayne continues to underperform in the early game a little bit. So we're buffing her AD. It makes sense to buff her AD because honestly, Vayne 3 is actually starting to do okay. So we probably don't want to buff her true damage or her attack speed or anything like that. This is just a slight nudge in the early game. And then Ziggs 3, same thing. Ziggs 3, never quite really worth the payoff, nudging up his spell damage just a little bit.
Yeah, with Vayne, it's like tricky because Vayne 3 like is a comp that exists and it's pretty good. But when you get a Vayne and you're not playing the Vayne comp, you don't really want to field her. And so like giving her some AD should help increase that power without and like make you consider playing Vayne early on, but without buffing Vayne 3 too much. Because most of Vayne 3's damage comes from like, you know, using Hurricane and putting on the true damage and then multiplying that with Forgotten AP and maybe Dual Gauntlet crits. So like this AD change doesn't really touch that and just makes Vayne 1 and 2 slightly better in the early game.
Yep. Cool. 2 costs. A lot of really small nudges here. Kennen just nudging his attack speed down a little bit. This is to try to make sure he can't quite cast twice as often unless the fight goes a little bit longer. So a little small nerf to Kennen there. Should also hit the Tristana comp a little bit more, although at this point it seems like that comp has fallen off a bit. Pyke is gaining some attack speed. It's kind of the opposite of Kennen. We want Pyke to be able to cast a little quicker. Might actually be a little bit more threatening. Set continues to underperform as a tank, giving him a little bit more HP. And then Soraka has also kind of fallen off, and so again, a little bit more attack speed, help her cast a little quicker.
Yeah, with like the Kennen and Pyke changes too, like Kennen uses Hellion a bit too well and starts multicasting every fight. Pyke doesn't use Sentinel well enough to like maybe get a second cast off if the fight goes really long. So, you know, we're helping that because both of these are like attack speed traits that multiply off of the base attack speed. So that's where we're making those changes.
Yep. Continuing on, Ashe is a fun champion that has been underperforming a bit. Frankly, for a three cost to have that low of HP, she's just a little too fragile, giving her a little more extra HP. Lux, same thing as Soraka, just giving her a little bit of attack speed. I don't think this is going to make Lux carry come back or anything, but should make Lux at least a little bit more exciting if you get her from a box. Misfortune actually follows the same rules as like the Riven and Yasuo and Lee Sin changes, that 3 stars just a little overperforming, so we're bringing that down, but not nearly to the degree that the others were. And then Nocturne has kind of the opposite problem, where Nocturne 1 and 2 are still not quite where we want them, so adjusting that base damage a little bit, but 3 star is getting pulled down as well, because again, the 3 cost 3 stars are, again, if you compare them to the 4 cost 2 stars, they're all just a little overperforming.
Yep, agree. Nothing to add on this slide.
Cool. Fiddlesticks. I'm sad about this change, but the reality is Fiddlesticks does a surprising amount of damage when you itemize him, especially with Revenant. There are times where he just can do a lot of damage when you're not looking, especially against Hellions. And then top it off with the Spellweaver change. We just didn't want Fiddlesticks getting out of control. So this is a bit of a preemptive nerf. Makes me sad, but it needs to happen. And then Karma. Karma is getting so close to being playable as an exciting 4 cost. And with a lot of her opponents going down, a lot of the 3 cost carries, I think she'll be better. So again, just very tiny nudge to bring her up just a little bit.
Yeah. Fiddlesticks is preemptive, but also just slightly overperforming. He works in so many comps. There's like, you know, the standard Revenant comp, and also, you know, Sins, Spellweavers. And then for Karma, it's like she's playable right now from ahead, and like she can actually do pretty well. You can actually even get first, you know, if you have are able to go 9, get a bunch of 5 costs in, but she just still needs the little nudge because it's kind of difficult to play her. And this looks really small, but like there's also a nudge to Garen, and so together we think this will be enough to push her into the meta more, into a more playable place in the meta.
Yep. On the 5 cost side, Akshan gets a attack speed nerf. This is less about nerfing Akshan and more to make up for the Sentinel change. If 6 Sentinel with this would just make him too good, so we're bringing that down a little bit. Garen, let's go with Garen first. Garen This is mostly a buff. He'll cast a little bit slower the first cast, but more likely to get a second cast. And his victorious trait will now do more damage. So if you want to take Garen the damage route and have him like kill people with his ult, he should get those victorious procs, and those victorious procs should hurt quite a bit. Teemo 1 is just overperforming a little bit, so we're nudging that spell damage down. We also gave him some improvements in that Cruel will now activate more quickly and reliably, as well as it can activate more than once per combat. So, for example, if it's down to Teemo versus Trist, it'll activate, and then the Doppelhellion Trist will come out, and it'll activate again. So that'll be cool. And finally, Volibear. I'm Kilroy actually redeemed Force Nerf on my channel. And let's be real, we're not going to ruin the balance of a game for a meme like that. That being said, we took a look at Volibear. Revenant continues to be the most dominant frontline. And so if you want that guaranteed Volibear cast, especially at 1 star, you need to invest in that a little bit. So we're just lowering that HP so that it might be possible to burst him down before he actually gets that cast off.
Yep. Yeah. So with Garen, we've seen like fights where an itemized Garen gets so close to getting a second cast off, which would stall for a good amount, like 5 more seconds because of the shield lasts so long. So buffing that should help that second cast go off when you heavily invest in Garen. And then for Teemo, this is a lot of the Cruel changes are like quality of life stuff. Sometimes you're like, is Cruel gonna go off? Is it not? And then there's like confusion around like how you get Cruel to go off. Sometimes it's like some players, you think you need to get an auto attack, whatever. But like basically it'll activate whenever you think it should activate. Even including like, it should swallow the unit, and then like a Zizirot portal spawns, and then it should swallow that as well. So, yep.
Cool. All right. Good news is most of the Radiant items are looking pretty balanced at this point. So the only change for making this patch is that Radiant Gargoyle Stoneplate is going to get a bit more health regen. Base Gargoyle Stoneplate is also getting buffed a bit to be 20 armor and MR, so that should be slightly more desirable. And Hextech Gunblade, we're raising the max shield up to 400, so that if you're full health, you can get a little bit of extra protection, hopefully let you stay alive a little bit longer, as it's a mostly defensive item.
Yeah, Dasik says Radiant Gargoyle Stoneplate's the best rating item in the game, so we're buffing it. We'll see if it actually is or not. But from what we've seen in the data, from what we've seen from people playing it, it's not been a great item, even though it's been getting some buffs in back-to-back patches. So
yeah, we'll have to see. All right, and then finally that leads us to bug fixes. I'll just go through these real quick. Ivern's tooltip shows Daisy's damage and stun duration, so you should actually be able to see that information. There was a 3 Draconic 3-turn egg that dropped 1 more gold than intended. We fixed the Radiant Chalice bug we talked about, so now Radiant Chalice should do exactly what it's advertised to do, even for AoE abilities. Aatrox will now heal himself, even if his ability's target dies, so you can always get that heal. I think, if anything, this is probably the most dangerous one. We're already seeing 3-star Aatrox do well. I think 3-star Aatrox will continue to do well. Units affected by both Radiant Frozen Heart and another attack speed slow will now properly shed the Radiant Frozen Heart debuff when leaving its radius, and Lucian's ability is now properly interrupted by a Lulu Polymorph. So, yeah, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the Aatrox one is, while it's like, this is kind of a buff to Aatrox, but it's, at the same time, it's kind of like Aatrox is advertised to do the heal. So like, just making it consistent, and it should be good for the comp, because like if you invest in Aatrox, like it should pay off for you. And so that's a positive change. I guess bug fixes are always positive changes. But then, and also just to add to the Frozen Heart one, I think it was extremely rare. I don't think many players have ever seen it, but mainly affects Tristana, where like, she gets hit by Frozen Heart and then a Lee Sin slow, and then jumps away, and she kind of like maintains that Frozen Heart slow. So now it'll probably properly shed, and so kind of above to Tristana, but like it's such a rare situation too.
Yep. Cool. All right, well, that's it for patch 11.17. Nothing too crazy, but general idea here is that 3-star 3 costs, maybe a little less dominant, 4 costs coming up, and some of those underplayed 5 costs should also be quite a bit stronger. So that's kind of the key takeaways, if anything. So, all right, any closing thoughts, Kent?
Yeah, no, I think basically from here on out, no more big reworks or projects or anything like that. Just, nudges to maintain the balance, and we'll keep a close eye out on everything. We'll be listening to feedback as always. And then, always share our thoughts on like why we make certain changes in these patch rundowns.
Yep. Cool. All right, then that's going to do it for us. Until the next patch rundown, enjoy the game and take it easy.